situation, new environment. My name is Kevin Duffy. I'm one of the solicitors and legal advisors from Scottish Engineering's legal team. And obviously the purpose of the breakfast briefings is to give an overview of a different topic every month. It's not designed to answer every question, but hopefully it'll get you thinking. Obviously, if you're a Scottish Engineering member and you need specific advice, then you can call myself or one of my other colleagues in the Scottish Engineering legal team. I intend talking for maybe 15 or 20 minutes and then take a few minutes at the end for a Q&A session. My colleague Sarah Carville is in the background and will be assisting with the chat function and admitting anyone who's coming in at a late date. This briefing is being recorded. Let me record that just now, in fact. And a link to the recording along with the slides will be emailed out to attendees over the next day or so. The slides contain various hyperlinks to additional information. The recording will also be placed on the Scottish Engineering website as well. So, what's on the agenda for today? Just going to give a bit of background about COVID-19 itself, then talking about vaccine enforcement for employees. As the media has perhaps said, no jab, no job. And thereafter, we'll have a quick chat about the new normal. What are going to be the working arrangements that we think are going to happen in the latter end of the COVID-19 or even the post-COVID-19 environment? So, COVID-19, as you probably all know, respiratory infection caused by a new coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, first identified late 2019 in the Wuhan province in China. Highly infectious, spreads through the air when people cough or sneeze, and also when they touch surfaces, and then they thereafter touch their nose, their eyes, or their mouth. So that's why social distancing measures along with hand washing, cleaning of surfaces and masks are key. And also grimly, as we know, coronavirus can also cause serious illness, hospitalisation, or even death. And that's from the Public Health Scotland definition, which you can get on that hyperlink at the bottom right-hand side as well. There are 3 vaccines currently authorised by the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulations Agency. The Pfizer-BioNTech, Oxford University AstraZeneca, and the Moderna one latterly. I believe even just today or yesterday, the Moderna vaccine has been rolled out in Wales, so hopefully it will make its way up to Scotland over the next few days as well. Now, you may be aware, obviously, that some countries have suspended the AstraZeneca one for periods of time and or for certain age groups due to the potential links to blood clotting in patients. The UK government's position is, from the 18th of March 21, is the MHRA has reconfirmed the safety of the AstraZeneca vaccine. So following suspensions by some countries of the COVID-19 vaccine, AstraZeneca, over suspected blood clots, the MHRA confirms that the benefits of the vaccine in preventing the COVID-19 far outweigh the risks. People should still go and get their COVID-19 vaccine when asked to do so. So, in summary, there are risks, but the UK government thinks these risks are manageable and, on balance, it's better to get the vaccine. This was highlighted again only yesterday, 6th of April, in the media when a senior official from the EMA, the European Medicines Agency, again confirmed there was a clear link, but the benefits outweighed the risks. Now, you can see that I've highlighted the word asked in that final quote there for a very specific reason as we move on to our next slide. Now, can vaccination of employees be enforced by an employer? No jab, no job, as I said in the media. At best, maybe, and it very much depends on the circumstances. And that final phrase there is something that I'll repeat many times during this particular presentation. So, as background, the general rule is that no one can be forced to undergo medical treatment. As a different example, you may have heard of occasional cases where people with very profound religious beliefs have refused certain types of medical care or certain surgical procedures, with the tragic result that they have died as a consequence. Ultimately, no one can be forced to undergo medical treatment, even if it is a fatal choice for them. Now, can the vaccination be made a requirement of the job? Now, to compel an employee to do anything, the employer must have a term in the contract to allow it. For example, you must work at this alternative site, you're required to do overtime, or work has dropped off, so therefore I'm going to use the short-term working or layoff clause in your contract to reduce your hours. So it's highly, highly unlikely that the current contracts will contain a vaccine enforcement clause. So therefore, it's perhaps easier for new starts to have that vaccine clause in there, because when the contract is being formed at the recruitment stage, it's easier to insert a clause in there when the contract is being formed. However, For existing staff, it's going to be a process of consultation for them. As a little bit of legal background, a contract is a bilateral legal agreement between two parties, and there are significant difficulties if one party seeks to unilaterally change that contract. There are risks such as constructive unfair dismissal or discrimination claims. Now, constructive unfair dismissal, as you may know, is where the company behaves so badly, so unreasonably, that it's deemed to be a fundamental breach of contract by the employer that can justify the employee resigning and saying that she or he has essentially been dismissed or pushed out by the employer. Now, as with any contractual change to terms and conditions, you need to seek the bilateral agreement with the employees. You put the case to them, you seek agreements, you deal with any disagreements on a one-to-one basis from the individual staff. So it's a process of consultation, with some negotiation and influence and skills required by the employer. Now, as I said, individual circumstances are important. Employment law generally takes a very dim view of blanket policies being implemented that impact upon everybody without due regard to that individual circumstances. Now, having talked to other employment law practitioners and certainly member companies as well, I do get the feeling sometimes that some companies are equating the vaccination policy with the drug and alcohol policy that some companies have. Can it be a zero tolerance approach, i.e. not getting the vaccine is the same as finding somebody with drug or alcohol in their body? They fail to comply with the policy, so bang, they're fired. Now, I'd suggest that that won't fly with an employment tribunal. As I mentioned previously, individual circumstances have to be taken into account. What happens if the person is pregnant or has an underlying health issue? Also, what's the absolute requirement or need for that particular employee to have the vaccine? Right, so take a couple of hypothetical examples at either end of the spectrum. In one case, you've got a lone or home worker employee who rarely sees anybody else and has an underlying health condition that may negatively interact with their taking the vaccine. Would her or his dismissal be deemed fair? Probably not. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got a care worker who's in regular close proximity to frail and elderly care home residents. The family members of the residents are insisting that care workers are vaccinated. Following a risk assessment, and that's a very, very important feature, it's deemed that vaccination will increase safety in the workplace. You consult and negotiate about getting this care worker vaccinated, but she or he refuses, purely because they don't like Nicola Sturgeon or some other ridiculous reason like that. So there's no valid reason, e.g. no other underlying health issue. So would the dismissal eventually of this employee be fair? Possibly, probably yes. Certainly fairer than the previous example. So some other factors to remember. 1 second. The vaccination is only one COVID-19 safety measure. Must bear in mind that there are other options that should be explored if someone refuses. Social distancing and hand washing are still key. So, for example, can the refusenick be moved to another role or another site? Can these things be looked at as well? Another thing you have to understand or take into account is what's known as vaccine hesitancy. Right. Certain sectors of society have historically had more challenging interactions with the health services. For example, gay, lesbian, trans communities or Black and ethnic minorities. Statistics show that, for example, Black women are 5 times more likely to die from complications surrounding pregnancy and childbirth than white women. So perhaps you would need more consultation with these sectors of the community as well. Now, anti-vaxxers, very much, these need to be distinguished from those who are vaccine hesitant. Anti-vaxxers, for example, proactively believe that conspiracy theories like COVID-19 is made up or not a threat at all. Now, with my employment solicitor's hat off, I know what I would like to do to these people, but with them back on, you still need to consult and liaise with these people, but I would ultimately give these beliefs very short shrift. There still needs to be a documented audit trail of you having consulted with them and taken on board their views, but ultimately, I would suggest that an anti-vaxxer view is not going to be protected under law. Certainly, it's not going to be protected, I would say, under any of the religion and belief discrimination laws. For example, you may remember a few months ago, there was a case where somebody who had ethical vegan beliefs was protected under law. I would suggest that that's not going to be the case for somebody who has anti-vaxxer views. The law about religion and belief is quite specific. It comes from a case called Nicholson versus Granger. And it says the belief must be genuinely held. It must be a belief and not an opinion based on present available information and on a weighty or substantial aspect of human life and behaviour. It must have a level of cogency, seriousness, cohesion and importance. And importantly in our case here, It must be worthy of respect in a democratic society, as well as not being incompatible with human dignity or conflict with other people's rights. It's that latter aspect of it being worthy of respect in democratic society and not in conflict with other people's rights, I think will be the killer blow for anti-vaxxer beliefs being held to be protectable, shall we say. So moving on. As I mentioned in the early pages, working arrangements, what's the new normal going to be? So we still have many staff working from home in line with government guidance. So what's going to happen post COVID-19? There have been many news stories about many different companies who are trying to look at alternative working patterns. For example, on CNN, they were saying that there's going to be a massive remote working experiment. Now comes the hard part. So many companies are going to go to, I would suggest, some sort of hybrid type situation. However, not all are going to be doing so. There's a BBC story about the finance organisation, Goldman Sachs. Their chief executive has said that working from home is an aberration. He expressly has rejected working from home as being the new normal. Now, it's important to note that most, if not all, of the companies that have made the headlines are service companies that are office-based. So things like finance companies, legal firms, insurance companies. I would say it's going to be very much a different situation for engineering and manufacturing, where physical presence in the workplace is required to actually make things. But you still need to look at the office functions, I would say, like HR and finance. There's not going to be any one size fits all for each company's solutions, because each company's solution will be specific to them, taking account of your own working practices and outcomes of the risk assessments. And again, there's not even going to be a one size fits all within a whole company. So what's going to be appropriate for your turners, your welders, your fabricators, your galvanizers, as I say, that's not going to necessarily be the same outcome as for your HR or your finance or your payroll people as well. So there should be more specific risk assessments for each department or person within the organisation. So working from home or office working, where do we go on this? So it is a reasonable management instruction to work in the office, and refusal to do so without a reasonable excuse may, and I emphasise may, be a conduct issue. But we should seek to avoid the adversarial position and try the collaborative approach with the employees as much as possible. Now, in the COVID-19 environment, as in pre-COVID-19 times, a flexible working request can be made. And I put a link in there to the ACAS guidance on flexible working as well. Now, as I always say to member companies, a flexible working request, it is a request. It is not an ultimatum. The flexible working provisions in law are basically a vehicle to facilitate contract negotiations between the employee and employer. Any refusals have to be justified and not just knocked back out of hand. Again, take minutes at meetings and send comprehensive letters to back up any decisions that are made in case there are any allegations of discrimination involved as well. Now, the penultimate bullet point there is, could companies be proactive in setting guidelines for future working arrangements? For example, could Department X work 40% at home on this occasion or that occasion? Or can A, B, and C tasks be undertaken at home, but D, E, and F tasks must occur in the workplace? Again, this would have to follow some sort of risk assessment type process, and there will have to be a degree of objective justification for this as well. And on the final bullet point there, vaccine passports. Now, that's something that's very much made the headlines over the last couple of weeks. These are currently being mooted for customers, i.e. not employees, in sectors such as non-essential retail, hospitality, and entertainment. Now, it appears to me that there's going to have to be some sort of app or electronic certification that shows that the person is vaccinated or immune or has recently been tested negative. Now, there are mixed signals coming from Whitehall, but seemingly there will be a coordinated approach with the devolved governments. Again, the BBC reported yesterday that Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, said that she was open-minded about using certificates to allow certain activities to resume and called for an open debate on the matter. Now, it must be noted that there is significant cross-party opposition at Westminster level for this. The Labour Party has indicated that it won't support vaccine passports, plus members of the ERG section of the Conservative Party are unhappy about it too. Nevertheless, the UK Vaccines Minister, Nadeem Zahawi, stated yesterday that if vaccine passports are brought in, it would be non-discriminatory. Therefore, taking a jump forward into our sort of area, could vaccine passports be used in an employment setting? It's not impossible, ultimately. Certainly, if they become widespread in a consumer setting, I would say that it's possible that they could eventually make it into an employment setting as well. Nevertheless, I would respectfully disagree with the UK government minister, and I would say that there are potentially significant discrimination risks. Ultimately, a lot of this is going to come down to the risk allocation, because the government will set the guidelines, but the implementation of the guidelines is going to come down to individual employers and individual retailers, for example, or concert venue holders. Do they allow this person in who doesn't have the vaccination if they are claiming to have an underlying health issue? Do they not allow this person in who doesn't have the vaccination certificate but is clearly pregnant? These are all difficult questions that will have to be answered, not by the government, but by the individual person on the front line as well. No. As I always say to members, please take detailed advice from us here in Scottish Engineering, because we are monitoring the situation closely. Plus, we'll be inputting our members' opinions and situations to relevant decision makers at Scottish Government and UK Government level as well. Now, that was a whirlwind tour round this particular area. Let me just bring that back on. Right. Are there any questions at all for people in this situation? Hopefully, let me just get back to the final page. There we go. So if there are any further questions, most certainly please get in contact. You know the number for Scottish Engineering, and hopefully you all have got my email address as well. So I'll hand it over to people just now. Somebody's coming in the back now. If not,
Kevin, it's Doug Taylor from Deason Babcock here.
Yeah, Doug, hello.
Hi, thanks for going through that. Just touching on the no jab, no job. Sure. I don't like the phrase, but it's the easiest way to get across the subject. Where do you? I know I've got rough views, but where do you think the position around, particularly for engineering organisations such as ourselves that work on multiple client sites, where the clients are either requesting vaccine information on employees, and that's got potential GDPR information, implications around justification of the data, who'll hold the data, what it'll be used for, etc. But potentially you could see where that may erode towards perhaps some clients saying, well, I don't want a particular employee on site if they've not had the vaccine. And do you think that as an employer, if a client says that, there is much mileage around the SOSR?
You took the very phrase out of my mouth there. As you know, SOSR, some other substantial reason. You can have a valid SOSR situation where you get third-party pressure. Mm-hmm. Your company would still need to be seen to have liaised with the overall client to see, are there any other alternatives that we can put in place? Can you move the person to another place? Can you ensure there are stricter PPE? Can you ensure that you've got all the hand washing and social distancing measures in? But ultimately, if you went through that sort of thought process and the client site, the client is still saying, no, we don't want that person on there, then an SOSR dismissal might well be justifiable. As you know, with yourself, I'm dealing with a couple of SOSR cases because of third-party pressure. Mm-hmm. And yes, in these cases there are. It's good that the company and other member companies as well have went through that process of still trying to look for alternatives. Because if a company were just to take the client's view at face value, get rid of Joe Bloggs, he's not vaccinated, yes sir, that's it, and not do anything about it, I would say that would possibly be unfair, even probably unfair as well. There still needs to be that process, because employment law takes a very dim view of things being fait accompli, being presented to employees without any input from them.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks. And just touching on your flexible working or ways that people will work in the future, I think you picked up a very valid point that not to mix up the issue around flexible working, i.e. where people need it, say, for family reasons, caring reasons and things like that, and just how people are going to work in the future, whether it's in an office or whether it's from home or some kind of hybrid. I think people are mixing up the terminology.
Yeah, most certainly. But even in a COVID-19 environment, somebody can put in a flexible working request as well. It may well be that their underlying reason for it is they just don't want to be in the office because they are very, very worried about being infected. Again, you would still need to go through the flexible working process to deal with it in an objective and professional manner.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Kevin. Thanks.
No problem, Doug.
Kevin, we also have a question from Tom Donaldson. It says, is working from home law or purely guidance?
It's purely guidance. There's nothing that says that you have to work from home or to say that you can't work from home as well. It's very much government advice that you do so where at all possible, but there's nothing that says in a statute that you must work from home. Absolutely. But again, it's all down to individual circumstances. Do you need to have that HR person in the workplace as opposed to that welder, etc. And what's going to be a valid working from home, office working hybrid for a legal firm is not going to be the same as for a machine shop as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
We've got another question here.
Yeah, crack on.
Any thoughts, RE workplace testing?
There are two types of testing just now, the lateral flow testing and the other one, which escapes, I think it's called PCR, thank you. And the lateral flow testing is the one that gives the more real-time information as well. It doesn't have to be sent off to the laboratory like the other one. And I believe even just today or yesterday, the government is going to be giving at least 2 tests per week to everybody as well. Now, it falls into one of the many measures that you should be putting in place. So the vaccinations, social distancing, masks as well. Again, and bearing in mind that the lateral flow tests are slightly less accurate than the other one as well, but it's the balance of risk because it gives that real-time information as well. So yes, it's something that can be looked at as well as part of an overall matrix of anti-COVID policies.
Kevin, it's Doug here again. I wasn't quite sure on the testing whether the arrangements are slightly different between England and Scotland, because as you know, we've got both offices and people who work on client sites both sides of the border, Wales and Ireland, and it did seem to be that the English government or health authorities were rolling out employer ability to test if you had above a certain number. And I'm not sure if the 2 tests per week is just England or whether that's going to be Scotland as well. There's maybe some more updated news to when I last heard the bulletin.
Certainly, when I was having a quick look through the news late last night, I'm sure I saw something like that, but I will double check and I'll get back to you specifically on that as well. And I might even see if there's a breakfast briefing that we can, a members briefing that we can put out by email just to talk about the specifics of workplace testing. But thanks for that one, Doug.
It's not been very helpful when there's been different guidance both sides of the border.
Yes, from political adversaries as well, because like Nicola Sturgeon doesn't see eye to eye with Boris Johnson and vice versa on many things.
Yeah, thanks.
We've just got a few more questions popping.
Yep, I'm happy to stay on for as long as possible.
One from Lisa Coney. Is there a requirement to log all test results for all employees?
Again, taking into account the GDPR, yes, you would only hold them for as long as is necessary. You wouldn't keep them in person's HR file for months, if not years. You would only hold them for as long as is necessary. Now, unhelpfully, how long is necessary is as long as a piece of string type question. So answer is yes in the first instance.
Okay, we've got a question from Dale Harris.
Yeah.
Forward B, where working from home is possible but significantly less productive.
Again, if working from home is possible, then that should still be the default as per the government guidelines. Again, it becomes a question of fact and degree. If it becomes so inefficient that it's negatively impacting upon perhaps the future of the company or the way that the company is progressing, then there becomes more of an argument for using that reasonable management instruction to bring people back into the office as well. And certainly as time goes on and the infection rate hopefully drops and the vaccination rate increases, then hopefully there will be more of an emphasis or more of a move towards more office-based working. But yes, there still should be almost a default towards working from home as per government guidance. And there is going to be an understanding that yes, there is going to be perhaps even initially some inefficiencies in doing that.
Got another question from John Clark. When considering a working from home request, how strong is the employee argument that we've worked from home for a year?
Yep.
From an employer perspective, is that we had no option but to let you work from home. Does that counter the argument?
It's a factor to be taken into account, most certainly. It's not going to be an absolute case winner for either side. You would still have to justify why working from home, or sort of the employee would still have to justify to a certain degree why working from home should be the norm for them, but also the employer will still have to justify why they want people into the office. For example, it might be that the person is involved in some sort of team building activity or has to train other people as well. It's done less efficiently at home. So as long as there is a fully reasoned, nuanced argument put forward by the employer, employers do have a fair degree of discretion in these situations. So in the specifics of what you're saying there, I wouldn't say that it's going to be an absolute case winner for the employee, but it's a factor that has to be taken into account.
Okay, we've got one last question from
Sure.
Kevin. Is it anticipated that insurers may invoke clauses in public insurances that building/property owners must safeguard or mitigate COVID risk?
It's certainly a possibility. Whether it's a probability, I'm not entirely sure. Certainly some of the other lawyers that I've been speaking to on this would say that if, for example, your insurer says everybody must be vaccinated, I think that would be difficult to enforce or difficult to police, then that's something that is yet another factor that goes towards the enforcement of vaccinations in the workplace. But yeah, it's a possibility, most certainly, that insurers will say that they want as much vaccination as is reasonably practicable in the situation. Again, I doubt it would be that everybody has to be vaccinated. Hopefully that answers the question. Sure. Right. Any further questions at all, either verbally or on the chat function?
No more on the chat, Kev.
Okay. Right. If that's the case, then thank you for everyone's participation. As I said, the recording will be on the website, and Sarah will send out both the link to the recording and the slides to all the participants as well. And on that note, I'll bid you good morning. Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks, Kevin.
Cheers,
Thanks, Kevin.